mentioned to Deborah, but Deborah hadn't been in your office to see it, so.
All right.
Make a
Things like
reproduction.
that.
She's gonna try to figure a way to make a reproduction of that, so Margaret can have
Well,
it.
mine has to be a reproduction.
It is, I'm sure.
Yeah, because it's, I mean,
It's big, it's,
Yeah.
that's huge, so.
yeah, they don't print, they didn't print like
No.
that in 1954 or
Right,
whatever.
exactly,
Yeah.
so, anyway.
I need to see what one it is, so.
Frank used to be able to tell me what year that was.
You probably did.
Well, it was because the carousel was there.
Is it the 40s?
I don't remember. I should remember. He said the carousel's there and the carousel came out in 58 or 62, whatever it was. And then he said that there's a car in front that's a 1963 such and
Yeah,
such.
that's how a lot of it gets identified.
Exactly. And it's like, so it's got to be in the window between when it came out and when that car would have been on the road.
But then it came back again for a short time in the 70s, the carousel, yeah,
Did it?
yeah.
Well,
That must be
Margot
what I
wants it, so
remember.
anyway, she wants it,
She wants it.
per house. Yeah.
I'll stop by and take a look at something.
Okay, are we now live?
We're live. Everyone
Okay.
should be able to hear us.
All right, everyone, I want to welcome everybody to this meeting. First off, I want to just check with our folks who are participating on Zoom, whether or not you can hear us. All right, great. So first off, this is something that we have done, we did for the first time a couple of years ago. And it's become a new tradition in Capitola, which is a little bit of an orientation for new folks who are serving on boards and commissions and refreshers for younger folks who've been serving on boards and commissions for long periods of time. It's intended to be kind of a high-level overview of what the city does and why we're here. And then we're also going to hear from our city clerk, from the assistant to the city manager, Chloe, as well as the representative from the city attorney's office on, who's going to talk about how to stay out of legal hot water as a city board and commissioner. So we have folks who are here in the room right now, and then we've also got some folks on Zoom. So one of the things we'll do is if we do get questions from you guys up here or in the back of the room, we will repeat them for our Zoom audience because you guys, I don't believe, are actually mic'd as far as I understand. Yeah, good. All right. So with that, I think I'm ready to kick it off. Okay, so the first thing, here's what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little about the city, what the city is, what we're not, what the role of advisory body members is. The Brown Act, meeting conduct, that will be covered by our city attorney, assistant city attorney. Public Records Act, and then conflict overview will also be covered by the assistant city attorney. And then the code of conduct and the social media policy, those are going to be covered by Chloe here. So, I hit the space bar, it didn't get me anywhere. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so one of the key things to understand about the city is when people talk about the city of Capitola, what exactly are they talking about? Well, at its core, what the city of Capitola is the 5 members of city council. At the end of the day, they are elected to council, they represent our community, and they each serve 4-year terms. And they are responsible for setting our local laws, for approving our budget, for allocating funds. And then they provide direction to me as the city manager, for anyone who doesn't know who I am, to implement those things. And so city council members, what they don't do is they don't go to the chief of police and say, hey, my neighbor's been acting up, go check on it. That's not allowed in our system of government. What they do is they pass laws or they give direction through a budget, sitting at these very seats you guys are sitting at. And then that direction that I transmit and I give to the staff. So basically, I'm the administrative head of the city council is the policy head of the city. City council also can do things. They can also delegate projects, basically ask for advisory bodies input on things. We actually tightened up that process a couple of years ago where it wasn't really very formalized about how projects would get referred to advisory bodies. And the council decided to make it an action of the city council to refer a matter to a body. Mostly because we had a situation a couple of years ago where one council member mentioned, hey, it would be neat to have this commission look on this. The rest of the council wasn't very interested in it. That commission then spent the next 6 months worth of work looking at something. And then it comes back to the council and the rest of the council said, we're not so sure about all this. And so everyone realized that everyone needed to be on the same page before committees started really working on something. Because, obviously at the end of the day, you're all volunteers. Planning commissioners excluded, but you're volunteers and you're volunteering your time. And it's important to make sure that you're working on things that the city council wants to see done. So as I mentioned before, that we have a council manager form of government. For those of you that, does anyone know if you don't have a council manager form of city government, have you know what the term is, what it's called? That's it, strong mayor. So strong mayor system of government is where your elected mayor is your sort of administrative head of the organization. Of the 479 cities in the state of California, I think like under 10 are strong mayors, and it's the bigger cities. So it's like LA, San Francisco, Oakland. There's a couple others as well. But strong mayors really work in organizations where they're large enough, where you're really offering significant compensation for the mayor. Smaller cities, the other 470 cities in the state of California, use this council manager form of government, where the city council hires a professional manager to basically manage the administrative function of the city. So that's how we operate here. And the city council has to give me direction in a meeting. That's kind of one of the keys. Is one of them can't walk up and say, Jamie, go out and do this. It's when they're sitting up there as a body, they make a decision about what they're going to do. They adopt the budget, or in limited cases when we're in closed session, sometimes when we're trying to maybe buy real estate or negotiate the settlement of a lawsuit, they can give direction to me in closed doors. So the city is made up of different departments. And we have different department heads that run each one of the different departments. We have the community development department. They do all the land use and planning functions. Finance department oversees the money. The police department overseen by the police chief, when the police department does, and the public works. In addition, within my department, within the city manager's department, we also have a museum, as well as the Parks and Rec division, which is housed within the city manager's department. And then the city attorney, we contract for city attorney services with an outside firm. And Tamar is here to, there she is waving, to talk about her slides in a bit here. Okay, next slide. So one of the key things I think to understand about kind of city is that was what we do. Police, public works, fire, finance, and community development and recreation. But what we don't do, there's a whole bunch of things, government services, that we don't do. And it's kind of important, I think, as city commissioner to understand those things. So, for example, we don't do fire. Fire is the Central Fire Protection District. They have an independently elected board of governors. And the city of Capitola doesn't issue them direction. We don't hire a fire chief. That's all on the Central Fire Protection Board. SoCal Creek Water District, again, independently elected board. They provide water to this half of Capitola. The other half of Capitola is provided water by the city of Santa Cruz. And the SoCal Creek Water District boundaries go way outside the city of Capitola. They go up hills and clear out into Aptos. School districts. The city has none of the schools. Maybe self-evident, but I think it's always good to remind yourself of that. The SoCal Elementary School District provides the schools over in SoCal, as well as Santa Cruz Gardens, and they operate the little Opal Cliffs Elementary Preschool at Jade Street Park, and then New Brighton Middle School. And then Santa Cruz City Schools, which is super confusing because it says Santa Cruz City, but Santa Cruz City Schools runs SoCal High. And then lastly, everybody in Capitola, when you see it on your ballot, is you vote for a member of the Board of Supervisors. On that side of town, you're in Manu Koenig's district, and on this side of town, you're in Zach Friend's district. And the Board of Supervisors, they have limited responsibilities in the city of Capitola, but they still are responsible for a lot of the social services. So the city of Capitola, you'll notice in our organization structure, we didn't talk about a public health department, or we didn't talk about all of the care for people with thank you, mental health challenges, all those things. That's a huge part of what county's done. In fact, if you were to look at the overall FTE count, the employee count for the county of Santa Cruz, I wouldn't be surprised if half of their employees are working on that social service side, which cities just don't do in general. And then in addition, the city also participates kind of regionally, if you will, to provide other government services to our residents, but we do it in partnership with other cities. So that's like the Regional Transportation Commission. It's called the RTC. They're the ones who are charged with making decisions about what to do with the rail corridor because they own it. They're the ones that fund and finance and develop the highway infrastructure projects when they're changing the highway. Santa Cruz Metro, that's the buses. We have a seat on the Santa Cruz Metro at Capitola, but it's also like a 12-person board with representatives from the city of Santa Cruz, Watsonville, and the county. The library system. Our library is our library, but it's operated by Santa Cruz Public Libraries, which is the same folks that run the libraries in the city of Santa Cruz and in the county and in Scotts Valley. And I actually serve on the board of directors for the libraries. Dispatch is the same way. When you call 911, you're actually not calling here, you're calling our dispatch center, which is up at De La Viega Park. And we do it in partnership with the county, Santa Cruz, and Watsonville. Animal services, the same kind of thing. Partnership. Each one of these agencies have slightly different memberships. It's funny. 911, Scotts Valley doesn't do. The libraries, Watsonville doesn't do. Animal services, we all partner together now to do. And then the newest government agency we formed is Monterey Bay Community Power, which is now called Central Coast Community Energy, 3CE. And we are the agency that buys the power for our region. So PG&E still delivers the power to all of your front doors and all of our businesses, but Central Coast Community Energy is responsible for procuring that power from power suppliers now. And we did this about 4 or 5 years ago. The purpose behind it was to try to accelerate the conversion to renewables so that we're buying renewable power more quickly than PG&E had planned for us. And I'm on the operations board for that entity as well.
Do you want to pause for questions?
Yeah. Do you think now is a good time to pause for questions? Sure.
We have a sign very end of the presentation for questions. So for participants who have like hands raised right now, if they could hold their questions to the end.
All right. So I do see a question on Zoom. Why don't we do this? Why don't we not go all the way to the end for questions, but we'll do it when I'm about to wrap up. So then we'll go and grab the question all soon at that point. Okay, so onto the advisory bodies. So our city advisory bodies, boards and commissions are super important components of the city, and they're the opportunity for members of the public to participate in sort of city decision making. They are either required by law. So like the planning commission, the city has to have, by law, has to have a planning commission, or established by the city council, maybe through a resolution or an ordinance. So our art and cultural commission and our planning commission are both required by law. And then our other boards are basically organized around a resolution that the city council adopted. The members are appointed by the city council. And everyone on the boards and commission are subject to the Brown Act. And we're going to talk more about the Brown Act a little bit later on when we get into the legal portion of this presentation. But basically what it means is that you can't have a meeting outside of it. The city's business needs to be discussed in public. So if more than a quorum, more than a majority of the members of that board and commission are getting together to talk about their business, they need to do it at a real meeting. So each one of the different departments has kind of responsibilities to help out one of the different advisory bodies. So the community development department helps out the planning commission and serves as staff. The finance advisory committee serves as staff. The finance department serves as staff. The finance advisory committee. The commission on the environment with the public works. My department, art and cultural commission, is now has just shifted, and it's now being overseen by the recreation department. And then the museum with Deborah, who's here, and Chloe helps with that work as well. And then the police department, they have their own boards and commissions, but they're a little bit different. They're more, they're less advisory bodies and more volunteers. And that's our volunteers in policing and our explorers. The volunteers in policing will help out with our special events. And then the explorers are sort of an opportunity for our youth to get involved in the police department and help out. So that's all I had. And I think we can pause quickly for questions on anything I presented, and then we can dive into the legal side.
We have one speaker, Lori, so I'll just ask her.
All right, Lori, go ahead.
I really didn't have a question. I'm at home watching this, glad to watch it, but I can hear about a third of what you're saying because your voice comes in and out and in and out. So if there's anything we can do to improve the Zoom experience, I'd appreciate it. Otherwise, I got to walk down there and attend the meeting.
Okay, so just tell me really quickly, does it work better when I hold this microphone closer to my mouth?
Well, I can't tell because I can't see you, but, but all I know is you just cut in and cut out, and I've got you turned up as loud as my little computer can go.
Okay, well, thank you for the feedback. I suspect we're using a replacement microphone, and I think I just need to do a better job holding it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, well, I should have taken the question when we first came up. Any questions from anyone in the room? All right, so seeing none, Tamar, I think you are on.
Yes, very exciting stuff. Thanks for the introduction, Jamie. And hi, everyone. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person today, but we'll just have to settle for this really fun virtual ethics training. So I'm covering 3 topics today. Again, very high level, just to sort of give you folks an understanding of the main issues that we're looking for. And so if you're going about your duties and you remember that I've mentioned something about something that's happening in front of you and you have questions, definitely feel free to talk to the staff member that's going to be assisting your advisory body. They'll be able to answer any questions, or if they can't, they'll send the question over to me. So with that, we'll start with the Brown Act and we can move on to the next slide. Cool. So the Brown Act has a lot of rules and exceptions to the rules. So it always helps for me to think about the animating principle behind it and why it exists. And that sort of guides all of the rules that govern our meetings. And Jamie sort of spoke on this a little bit earlier. Basically, the rule is that all meetings of legislative bodies of local agency must be open and public. And the reason is, you know, we live in a democracy and we want the public to be able to not only see how decisions are being made, but also to take part in, to question, to sort of be a part of that decision-making process as much as possible. And this is enshrined in our Constitution at Article 1, Section 3, which I won't bore you with, but if you're very interested in it, you can take a look anytime. Next. So one of the rules that we get from the Brown Act is that each body can only take action on items that appear on the agenda. And the idea behind this, again, is that we publish the agenda in advance of the meeting to give the public notice of what each body is going to be talking about and what decisions are going to be made. So we don't want to have these sort of surprise discussions or deliberations that the public was not aware of, because then we're depriving them of the opportunity to take part in that decision. So if there is something that you're itching to talk about, but it's not on the agenda, you can just ask the staff member to place it on the agenda for the next meeting. Alternatively, the only other times you can really talk about things that aren't on the agenda is to respond to a statement or a question. But again, we're not making any decisions here, so we're trying to keep that as short as possible. You may ask questions for clarification, make brief announcements, a short report or something on activities that you were doing on behalf of the body, provide reference to staff or other factual or other sources of factual information. And then, as I mentioned, you can, if there's something really pressing, you can request that staff place that matter on a future agenda. To move on. Cool. So earlier I said that all meetings need to be open and public. And of course, because this is a legal principle, the word meeting has a whole bunch of different elements that need to be met for it to be considered a meeting under the Brown Act. So a meeting is any gathering of a majority of the members of the body at the same time and location to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action upon any item that's within the subject matter jurisdiction of that body. And so, for example, if the body has 5 members, 2 of the members can talk to each other about something that's going to come before the body, but 3 of them meeting together to discuss it outside of a meeting would violate the Brown Act. This applies to matters that have not been previously considered or even scheduled for a hearing. So anything that is within the purview of the advisory body that you're sitting on might be subject matter that you're gonna have to think about in discussing with other members of the body. Next. So the general rule of thumb is that if you're on a board, a public board or a body, the Brown Act probably applies to you. There are limited exceptions, but it applies to any permanent or temporary advisory or decision-making commission, committee, board, or other body that's created by the city. So if the city council creates a temporary advisory commission on why the best lawyer on earth is me, then that would be considered a Brown Act body, and we would have to have those meetings be open and public. It also applies to standing committees that have continuing subject matter jurisdiction, or standing committees that have a meeting schedule that's fixed by some action of the city. Next. So there are two types of improper meetings that we need to look out for under the Brown Act, and these are considered violations of the Brown Act, and they could become a big legal headache both for you and for us. So the first type is called a daisy chain, and as the name implies, this is when member A talks to member B talks to member C, and so on until a quorum has been reached. So basically, again, we're thinking about the animating principle behind the Brown Act. In a daisy chain, the body is kind of meeting and making a decision and deliberating outside of a public meeting. So the public has been cut out of that decision-making process. So we can't have that. The second type of improper meeting that we often see is called a hub and spoke. Again, the names are very helpful here. We have an intermediary, city staff, member of the public, even another commissioner who acts as the hub and then goes out to all of the different members of the body, the spokes, to kind of create a consensus or to exchange information or to make a decision that should be taking place within the public's view. Okay, carry on. So all of that said, individual meetings are okay. You can engage in separate conversations outside of a meeting to answer questions or provide information. But the kind of rub with this is that you need to be careful that that person doesn't then communicate what you have said to a quorum of the other members of the body. So if you ever have these sort of one-on-one meetings, if you're on the planning commission, for example, and you want to meet with an applicant, that's fine, to have your questions answered, to go through plans, what have you. But you should be aware that you can't control what the applicant is going to tell other commissioners that they meet with. And so you don't want to communicate any policy positions or kind of what you're thinking about it, because then if that applicant talks to other commissioners, then we might have a Brown Act violation. So frankly, the place that we see Brown Act violations most often these days is with technology, because it applies even to emails, text messages, social media posts, etc. And so like from social media, for example, even on a 5-person body, if 3 of the members like a post that's about the subject matter of their commission or body, then that's considered a Brown Act violation. So we need to be very aware of how social media is used. Commenting is the same thing. Email is probably the easiest one to accidentally mess up. I do it with kind of embarrassing regularity, but one of the best ways to avoid accidentally sending information to the whole board or body is to just BCC everyone, so that people can't then reply all and start sharing opinions and information. Okay, carry on. Perfect. So yeah, recommendations for email. I got ahead of myself a little bit, but try to avoid sending emails to the whole body if you can. If you need to share something, try to keep it to information only and don't solicit a response. Do BCC everyone just to completely eliminate the temptation. Be careful in replying to emails. Like I mentioned earlier, you want to try to not communicate positions or make any commitments on any matters that might be before your body, because you don't know what that person's going to do with the information that you gave them. again, don't reply directly to a majority of the board or commission, what have you. And then this is just kind of a common sense one. Do think carefully when you send emails. As we'll talk about later, emails are public records. And so if you don't want to see it on the front page of the newspaper, maybe don't put it in email. Okay, so what happens if we do have a Brown Act violation? Thankfully, the Brown Act does have kind of a second bite at the apple. Before any potential plaintiff sues the city, they have to send us a letter saying, hey, Capitola, we think you violated the Brown Act. Here's how we think you did it. You have X number of days to fix it, or we're going to sue you. And then our office will look at it and we'll either say, yeah, you're right. You know, this is a Brown Act violation. If that happens, we kind of just run the whole thing back and have that meeting again without violating the Brown Act. And then, you know, that's that. The action that was taken in violation of the Brown Act is invalidated. If our office looks at it and says, no, I don't think this is a violation, then we send them a letter back saying, nope, no violation here, then they can sue us. If we lose, we might be on the hook for the other side's attorney's fees, which is brutal. And then it's just another thing to remember is there are criminal charges associated with Brown Act violations, but only for like knowing and willful violations. So if you violate the Brown Act with the intention of depriving the public of the right to participate in the government, then you might have criminal charges levied against you. But that's, I mean, I won't say it's rare, but it's uncommon. And now that you've had this training, you won't do it. Last thing on the Brown Act is Rosenberg's rules. Oh yeah, that's it. As Rosenberg's rules, these are not really about the Brown Act, but it's just sort of a way that the city has decided to run its meetings. They're parliamentary rules of procedure. So how motions are made, how they're seconded and passed and amendments made and all of that good stuff. And again, as the slide says, most advisory bodies are less formal. The city has decided that these are the best, this is the best way to run meetings in an equal and fair manner. If you have questions on what those are, your staff member will be able to help you out. There are also really nifty one-pagers online. Okay, so that's it for the Brown Act. I'll pause for questions, I guess, if there's anything on the Brown Act. Otherwise, I will carry on to the TRA. Julia, I can't see if there are any questions. Can you let me know?
I guess, is this on?
Ask the question.
Oh,
I'll
ask-
read it.
Okay, I just had a question because I always do a monthly report for the board. But I was told I didn't need to include it within the posting for the agenda. So would I need to do that now or not?
So
For a
it's-
monthly, oh, go ahead, Jamie.
were you able to hear that?
Yeah. I
Oh,
think
okay,
so.
go ahead and answer.
So for the monthly reports, so long as you sort of keep it brief to what you've done for the, I can't quite, the council commission, then I think it's fine. Usually, and Jamie, maybe you can jump in, there is a portion for sort of like council updates or what have you, and that would be the appropriate time to make that announcement. But yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So it's permissible for staff to communicate with the board on just updates. I do that with the city council, actually, kind of on a weekly basis, just giving them updates. It's fine. What they can't do is then turn around and reply all and say, that's great. Next street we should pave should be X. So it's fine for you to write to your board a monthly update. And probably the best practice here would be, as Tamar suggested, is a BCC. So nobody does do a reply all.
Yeah, we do the BBC already with the youth representative, but I didn't know it'd be good now to do it with all of them. So
Probably it does avoid the situation where somebody could just hit reply all, and then in theory you could have a Brown Act violation.
and I don't need to put my monthly report on the board when I put the agenda. Okay.
No, you don't have to put your monthly report. You can,
But
but
it's not necessary. But
Yeah.
if somebody asks for it, obviously it's available, so. And I do, one of our items is me, providing information during the meeting about my monthly, report, so.
yeah.
Perfect. Alrighty. Then I will roll on into the Public Records Act. We can go on to the next slide. So basic rule here is that all of the city's public records are subject to disclosure upon request by anyone in the public, no matter if they're suing the city or if they are, doesn't matter. Anyone can request any public records and the city has to respond. And there are specific exemptions listed in state law as to which records are not releasable or disclosable, but the basic rule is public records must be released upon request. Next. Again, this is a legal principle, so every phrase and word has a very annoying definition with a bunch of elements that need to be reviewed and analyzed with every question. So a public record is any writing containing information relating to the conduct of the public's business that is prepared, owned, used, or retained by any state or local agency, regardless of physical form or characteristic. So for example, going back to that last question we had, email updates to the board from staff about whatever would likely be considered a public record, unless you're sending emails about like, today I picked up my child from school and then we went to lunch, which wouldn't really be a public record because it doesn't have to do with the public's business. Next. So the big reason that I wanted to include this this topic in our presentation today is because cell phone and personal email records can be subject to the PRA. And so if the city gets a Public Records Act request that seeks all correspondence relating to whatever development project X from 2019 to present, I will then send an email, or someone from my office will send an email to the planning commissioners saying, dear planning commissioners, we received an email or a PRA request seeking records relating to this development project. Please search your cell phone and personal email records for records responsive to the request. And the reason for this is there was a California Supreme Court decision in, I think, 2018 or 2017 that basically says you can't circumvent the Public Records Act just by conducting the city's business on your personal devices. So if you have text, emails on your personal cell phone or in your personal email accounts that relate to the public's business that you sort of that were conducted in furtherance of your duties on your board or commission, then those are going to be subject to the PRA. So the best practices for this are to try to avoid texting about city business. I know that can be hard, but it's an easy way to not have to go through your texts anytime the city gets a PRA request. With email, if it's on your city issued email, we'll be able to do the search on our end, but your personal emails, what I would say is try to keep all city business on non-city emails in one email account or in one folder. So all you have to do is go in and search a few key terms and forward over the responsive emails to me. It can be kind of cumbersome to do this, but alas, that's the world we're in. Go ahead, Jamie.
I'm just going to jump in here. In my experience with the city, we have gotten PRA requests for planning commissioners to see planning commissioners' records and emails. I don't believe I've ever seen one for a museum board member or art and cultural commission member. We may have gotten one around an art and cultural commission. An artist wasn't selected for an art project, but just to think about, they don't routinely come up for most of our boards and commissions, but it's more likely to come up for the planning commission for sure.
Yeah, that's right. All right, cool. So that's kind of it for the Public Records Act. If we get a request that implicates one of your boards, me or someone from my office will be in contact with you folks, and we'll walk you through all the steps. Okay. If there are questions, go ahead and stop me. Otherwise, I will keep on rolling.
We have a question, actually.
Sure, go ahead.
So I'm a planning commissioner and I'll often have questions of staff about various items that come up. I used to go into the office and say, what does this mean? What does that anymore? I just email or text and ask a series of questions. So, why did you do this? What does this mean, et cetera? Is there, based on this public works or public access thing, is there a preferred way that I should be know?
So the question was that historically, this commissioner had gone into the office and talked with staff directly, but he's been using email and text to ask questions for clarification ahead of time. And the question is there a preferred means to get that information, understanding the requirements of the Public Records Act request?
I mean, so I don't know that it's necessarily, at least from on our end, it's not necessarily preferred or not. I mean, if you're getting information from staff about an item that's before the commission, that's fine. Those would be subject to the PRA. So if we did get a request for records relating to the project that you had questions about, those emails would be responsive and we would more than likely produce them unless there was like some attorney-client communication involved or something like that. But I mean, most of the cities that I do work with have like thousands of emails for each of the development projects. So it's very, your method of communication is very common. If you wanted to make my life easier in reviewing emails, then you would go into the office and ask them, but it doesn't really make a legal difference.
I think from a management standpoint, my recommendation would be verbal conversations if it's going to be a controversial, difficult project. And if it's a relatively simple project, email correspondence is just fine.
Jamie, would you suggest, like, as a planning commissioner, that we should set up a separate email specifically just for planning commission business so that if a public information request that came in, it'd be easier to sort through that? I mean, other than it was connected to our personal email and you have thousands.
Yeah, so I don't know if you heard that tomorrow. I think it's more of a management question, but and it had to do with having a sort of specific email associated with the planning commission. My recommendation would be to have a city account. Planning commissioners can have a city email account that can be forwarded somewhere else, but that way that'll assure you that all the email that's coming in for the city, that address then the city has access to, and the records will be retained consistent with our records retention schedule. Alternatively, if I was on the planning commission, I didn't want to have a city account, I probably would just make a planning commissioner Jerry account, because I do think that it just becomes a little bit easier to find all your emails and stuff if you do get a records request than having to go back through your personal email.
Thank you.
Yep, that's exactly right. Okay, so I think that's it on the PRA. We'll quickly move on to conflicts. Again, so conflicts issues are very thorny, extremely fact dependent, and this overview is just that. It's a very high level overview, really intended just to give you folks some background and allow you to spot issues if you think there might be any, and bring those issues or questions to staff who can then sort of help you work through them. So there are a lot of rules, exceptions to exceptions here that I'm not going to get into, but these are just the main rules that you should be thinking about as you go about your public duties. So there's three sources of conflict of interest rules: the Political Reform Act, contractual conflicts under Government Code Section 1090. Those are often referred to as 1090 conflicts. And then there's common law ethics. So and I'll go through each of them very briefly. So like I said, these rules are a total headache. So it's always helpful to think about why we have them, because that will help make the rules make sense as we go through them. So the purpose of the conflicts rules is basically just that public officials owe a duty of loyalty to the public, such that personal or private financial interests should not be allowed to enter into the decision-making process. And so these rules that I'm about to go through sort of target that issue of prohibiting public officials from allowing those financial or personal interests to enter into the decision-making process. So as I said at the top, confusing, the rules, I can't stand them. It does keep me employed, but man, are they annoying. But recognizing potential conflicts is the whole point, the whole reason that I'm here. Talk early, talk often with city staff when you think there might be a conflict. We would always rather have you bring the question to us and to city staff, and have city staff say, no, it's not a problem, don't worry about it, before than to have you folks come up after and say, oh no, they acted on this and I think there may have been a conflict. What do we do? So there's no such thing as a dumb question, especially with conflict. So feel free to talk to your staff as often as you need to about them. So the first or one of the ways that our conflict laws sort of try to make sure that public officials aren't biased by their economic interests is through this filing of the Form 700. The purpose of them is just to alert the public to economic interests and personal interests that might be affected by a public official's participation in items. All designated public officials have to file them. There's a list. If you are one of those public officials, your staff will let you know, and it's on our slide. So Planning Commission, Art and Cultural Commission, Historical, Museum Board members and staff. On these Form 700s, interest in real property, investments, business positions, sources of incomes, and gifts are disclosed. And it's just a way for all of those potential conflicts of interest to be in one place, so that everyone knows who might be beholden to who or what have you. These forms are due on April 1st of this year. It's coming up. And then again, upon leaving office, and you hand those off to Julia, who's our city clerk. Okay, so our first source of conflict laws is the Political Reform Act. And the general rule here is that a public official may not make, participate, or influence a governmental decision that will have a foreseeable material financial effect on the official's economic interest. And economic interest is defined as one of those three things that are listed there. So source of income, which is $500 or more during the past 12 months. Another economic interest could be business management interest, your employment interest, or an investment interest in a business. And then a last one is real property. The big one to be aware of here, excuse me, is property within 500 feet of a project. There's kind of a red line rule with that, where if your real property is within 500 feet of a project that might come before your body, you're disqualified unless certain other factors are met. So keep that in mind as you go on, especially planning commissioners. It'll be a bigger deal for you folks than for our other advisory boards. I think that is it for this one. There are two exceptions to this. So if we run through the analysis and we determine, oh, yep, you live next door to a big development, that's going to be a conflict. There are two ways that you might still be able to participate. The first is the public generally exception, and the second is the legally required participation exception. So for the public generally exception, you may, if you're conflicted out of a decision, you may still participate if that decision will impact a broad range of people or interests in the city. I think of this as sort of like the general plan rule or the water rates rule, although you folks wouldn't have water, but in any event, a decision that will affect 25% of all of the businesses, all of the real property, or all of the individuals in the city, then you can still participate, even if you're conflicted out. The second exception is the legally required participation exception. This occurs when so many people are on the body are conflicted out that a quorum can't be met. And so we need to just pick someone to participate, even though they are conflicted out. And I think there's a fun rule. I think it's like drawing straws for which conflicted member can participate. This exception is a little bit narrow. It cannot be used if a quorum could later be met. So if someone's absent, that person's not conflicted out, they would make a quorum. Can't use this exception to bring someone in, and it cannot be used to break a tie. All right, I think that's it for this slide. Okay, so that's it for the Political Reform Act. Like I said, it's much more involved than those three slides, but that's what you need to know to have the flags go up if something comes across the table and you're not sure whether or not it's a conflict. Bring it to your staff and they'll help you work through it. So our second source of conflict law is Government Code Section 1090. The big thing to remember for 1090 is that this is only going to be triggered if there is a contract. If the city is entering into a contract, then we start thinking about 1090. If there's no contract involved, we don't need to touch it. So 1090 prohibits city officials and employees from having financial interest in contracts made by them in their official capacities. If a public employee or official has a financial interest in the contract, then the city just can't enter into it at all. This is different than the Political Reform Act, and I'll get into that a little bit later. There are so many exceptions to this. Your interest in the contract could be deemed a remote interest or a non-interest. And in either of those cases, the city might still be able to enter into the contract if the conflicted member does not participate. So again, an example of this would be if the city is going to enter into a contract with an arborist and you happen to be that arborist, the city cannot enter into that contract. There are so many other examples and so many other exceptions. If you think this might be an issue and a contract is before the body or board you're serving on, do take it to staff and just kind of ask them, hey, what do you think? Here are the facts as I know them. Do you think this would be a problem? Again, as early as possible. All right, I think that's it for 1090. So if you are disqualified here, we've run through the Political Reform Act conflicts issues, and we've determined that you do have a conflict and the exceptions don't apply, or if we've run through the 1090 provisions and we've determined that it's a remote interest or a non-interest, then you, the conflicted member, are disqualified, but the rest of the body can still participate, do whatever it needs to do to deliberate on that item. So if you're disqualified, not a big deal. We just identify the applicable interest with specificity, and city staff or our office can assist with that. Then you step down and you leave the room. If the meeting is over Zoom, we've just been advising people to turn the camera off and turn the mic off. And you refrain from any discussion or participation. If you are conflicted out and you may not participate, you can still participate as a member of the public from the audience on matters that affect your personal economic interests. So you can go make public comment and say, I live next door to this project and it's going to, whatever, decrease my property value. That's fine. But you can't participate in the deliberations of the Planning Commission on that development. Again, if you're not sure whether or not you should participate, reach out to city staff. All right, I think that's it for, yes, I threw this slide in. It doesn't really have to do with the Political Reform Act 1090 or common law ethics, but misuse of public resources is just something that comes up every once in a while. And the general rule is that no one can use public funds or resources for personal, non-public purposes, including campaigns. And public resources includes staff time, office equipment, supplies. It does exclude incidental or minimal uses. You know, paperclip here or there is not going to get you in trouble, but it's just something to be aware of. There are pretty steep penalties, disqualification from office, criminal penalties, civil penalties. And I am now realizing that I didn't do the common law ethics, and I'll just quickly go over that. If it's not a Political Reform Act issue and there's no 1090 conflict, so there's no contract, but it's still, you wouldn't like seeing it on the front page of the newspaper, it doesn't pass the smell test, there might be a common law ethics issue. And that is, again, there's not really a black letter law rule on this. It's kind of just, we have to think about the duty of loyalty that public officials owe to the public and whether the circumstances of that public official with this decision would compromise that. So that's a little bit more common sense-ish. If you think that there might be a conflict, but it doesn't necessarily feel like a Political Reform Act or a 1090 conflict, then present those facts to staff and we can sort of work through the analysis to determine whether or not there would be a common law conflict. And I think that that is all for the for the legal part of this presentation. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So I understand the conflicted out part where you're on a board, the planning commission, and you're not allowed to make rules. But you said that you're then supposed to leave the room unless you have a financial interest, in which case that could be an exception. So then you recuse yourself from the board, you come back into the audience, and you say, I would like to, make my opinion known on this, not as a ruling body, but just as a member of the public. I can do that only if I have a financial interest in it. And the question is, I've got a financial interest in everything. It's going to affect my property value. It's going to affect the safety of my street. It's going to affect. So why can't I be a member of the public and speak out on that issue?
Okay. How much of that did you pick up?
I think I got it. Although if I start talking about things that aren't relevant,
Okay.
let me know. So the rule is a little more narrow than financial interest. It's personal economic interest. So something about like the safety of the street probably wouldn't qualify here. And again, these are all dependent on the specific facts of the situation. So if something like this comes up, I would need to know all of the facts about the project or what have you that's coming before the body, your financial interest, and then I would go onto the FPPC's advice opinions database, and I would search around for something that was similar, because at the end of the day, our office, it's the FPPC, which is the Fair Political Practice Commission, that enforces these rules. And so we just need to look to their past decisions for guidance. And the only way to really do that is to look for similar facts to the ones that we have here. So for example, if you live next door to this huge development that's going to block your view and reduce your property value, you can go as a member of the public and say, hey, this is going to reduce my property value because the view is going to be blocked. If a school is being built 5 blocks away, or 5 blocks away, and it might reduce your property value, there might be these other like kids walking around all the time, we'd have to look at the FPPC advice letters for guidance, because there's no real rule about what qualifies as a personal economic interest aside from that.
So,
Could you explain the rationale behind that? You were good about explaining the rationale behind the Brown Act. I don't understand.
Sure.
Not being allowed to speak in public.
So let me just offer a quick management answer to your first question, which is, I've been doing this for, I think, 25 years, and I have not seen a situation where someone elegantly left the dais up there and then sat down and then provided public testimony. It's awkward. It's awkward to say the least. And so I think in general, my recommendation from a management standpoint, independent of the law, would be if you're going to recuse, it's best to just leave the room. But you do certainly have some specific rights as a citizen to participate in the decision-making that Tamar is going through. But I don't know, Susan, you've been in a lot of Brown Act meetings. Have you ever seen it done elegantly?
I've never, I agree with you. I've never seen anyone step down from their role with the planning commissioner and then come back and appropriately speak to the planning board.
So from there.
Is that a problem? What's the legal rationale?
Well, here, then I'll pivot back to Tamar.
So the
Legal
reason
rationale for the exceptions. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. The reason that exception exists is because you don't lose your rights as a citizen to participate in government or your First Amendment rights just because you're a councilman or a planning commissioner. So the idea is we don't want your biases to impact the board's or the commission's decision, but you have the right to advocate for yourself before the. Sorry, I missed that one.
You mentioned that I could do that with personal interest, but not with the vague interest of the school down the street.
So the question was, the vague interest with the school down the street was a little bit more less cut and dried than in the large development next door.
Yes. Was that? I don't. What's the
question? Was what?
Why can't I be a public speaker
So the question is what, why can't we make the financial tie to any issue? And I think,
I mean, that is an FCPC rule that we're all trying to figure out how to interpret.
Well, it seems to me that if I'm on a board and one of my members recuse themselves, and then they come back and they sit in the back of the room and they sort of make faces or sigh or carry on, it does influence the board because, they're one of us, they're one of our team. So I think that the reason you can't speak on items other than if there's a personal financial interest is that you have more clout than the average person has. You work with these other 4 people, you have more influence.
Yes, certainly. And I mean, that's why you have to leave the room. And on Zoom, you have to turn the camera off so that, your facial expressions or whatever aren't going to sway the people that you work with once a week or once every 2 weeks.
So that's a legal precedent, not just common sense.
Well, that's the rationale, right, behind the rule. And that's why that is why you're allowed to talk about things that affect you personally, or you affect your economic interest personally. But, if you're conflicted because your son owns your son is the contractor on a project, then you wouldn't be able to discuss that unless you have some ownership interest in the company or something like that. But again, I mean, I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this stuff because it's very hard to talk about conflicts rules in the abstract. They're very, very fact dependent. And, the FECC tries to have very elaborate rules and regulations to cover every incident or every set of facts. But at the end of the day, it's just kind of, we look at past decisions and we give you our best advice.
all right. I think we are ready for the last 2 items to be presented tonight. Chloe, you're going to pick these up? Nope. Julia's going to pick these up.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
While the attorney is still here? Oh,
Sure.
She's off, I guess.
She's still here, I think.
The Fair Political Practices, they have a ethics training. Been on other boards and commissions where that's required to do every 2 years. Is that?
It's required for our planning commissioners.
Okay.
But that's the only. group that's
Okay.
required for.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. So the question was about you heard, okay.
The AB 1, 2, 3, 4 trainings. Yeah, so it's the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Okay. Good afternoon or evening, everybody. My name is Julia. I'm the city clerk. I don't know if I've met all of you or emailed all of you, but I've emailed some of you. So today we're going to go over really briefly the Code of Conduct, which is a city administrative policy. The policy in its entirety is included in the agenda packet, but we'll be going over some of the topics that are covered within that policy today. So the policy covers the core values for city council members and appointed officials, such as board or committee members. Some of the main values are transparency and standards for decision-making for our advisory board members and city council members. They include standards for how city council and appointed officials are expected to interact with city staff and members of the public. There are also standards for relations with other council members and decorum at public meetings, standards for communications with the public, boards and commissions, other governmental agencies, staff, and the media, and procedures to investigate violations of the standards and penalties for those who do violate the standards outlined in this policy. The core values of the policy are responsibility, integrity, respect, and accountability. It involves, like I said, decision-making and conduct standards. So under the topic of transparency, we talked about having public meetings and what that means for city council members and advisory group members. It talks about considering all sides of each topic that is presented at these meetings. And it also outlines why closed sessions are kept private in these discussions and some of the topics that would be included for city council members at these closed session meetings. This policy also covers fairness of process, so making decisions on the merits of the item, disclosure of information for the item, and it advises city council members and advisory board members to remain neutral on quasi-judicial hearings. In addition, it also covers ethical decision-making, so avoiding the appearance of impropriety during meetings and making sure that ethical principles are followed, so avoiding personal interests, no personal gains, don't accept gifts, things like that nature that are covered in what Tamara was talking about previously. Under the topic of interacting with staff and other members of the board or council and members of the public, so as we talked about previously, the city manager is responsible for city staff and oversees city staff and should be providing direction to city staff. So if the council was to provide direction to staff, it should be passed on through the city manager. Within that structure, the city manager can provide direction to department heads, and then department heads would give orders or directions to their individual staff members. So kind of following that chain of command. And as a board or committee member, communication should go through your staff representative. So your staff representative might distribute information to you, or it would be passed down through the city manager to the staff member to you. Other members of the board and the public, when you're interacting with them, you should keep in mind that each committee's chair would run the meeting. So each group has a little structure and the chair of the meeting helps to organize the structure of each individual meeting. There is decorum that was recommended to be used during meetings. So like Robert's Rules of Order, for example, if that's applicable, that would be what would be followed during the meeting. As I mentioned, it's important to maintain civility, not only with each other during the meeting, but also with members of the public as they approach the dais to speak during a meeting or if they have public comments. And it is important to stay on topic and making sure that we're following the agenda to make sure that we're not breaking the Brown Act during these meetings. As we discussed previously, violations not only of the Brown Act, but also of this code of conduct could result in enforcement. So one of the items would be if a complaint was filed, you can file a written complaint with me, the city clerk. I would then provide it to the city attorney and city manager if you feel that there's been a violation of this code of conduct. Then an investigation would be conducted, and this would be determined by the city attorney, or the city council could also order an investigation into the complaint. And then there would be enforcement. So for example, the city council may dismiss the complaint or claim or issue a warning if they found it was warranted. They could also issue a verbal or written reprimand, or they could demote or remove an appointed commission member. The planning commissioner must be removed by their direct appointer on the council, or a vote of at least 3 council members, so quorum of the city council. Like I said, this is a brief overview of the policy. The policy in its entirety is available online. It was also emailed to new commissioners as they were appointed. The very last page of a policy is an acknowledgement. So each commissioner should return a signed copy of this acknowledgement. It's page 17 of the policy. This signed copy of the acknowledgement of the code of conduct is kept on file during the duration of your term as a commissioner. So we keep it to make sure that you have acknowledged the policy and are aware of what is recommended for the code of conduct during your term. If you have questions about that, you can always reach out to me via email or by phone. I am happy to go over it further in detail with you. Or if you're not sure if you've signed that code of conduct and you think you need to submit it, we can always accept it or let you know if we have it on file. And with that, I'll hand it over to Chloe for social media.
I have the mic. Thank you. Yes, okay. Can everyone hear me and see me? I can see everyone here. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending. I'm going to keep it short because I know we've been talking for quite some time about lots of interesting things. So, sorry, I'm nervous. Social media. We're covering all different types of accounts this evening. So the policy, which was included in the packet, as our city clerk mentioned, is not only about a specific account that names you as an appointed or an elected official. For example, if your name is Mayor Jane Doe, it also covers your private personal social media account that you may have had before and retain after you are an appointed or an elected official. So really this covers all different kinds of accounts that you may have. And some people may ask, this is my First Amendment right to speak my mind on social media. And you're correct. That's true. No one's trying to stop you. We're trying to protect you and keep everybody out of hot water. So this is really, we put a lot of thought into the policy and designed it to acknowledge your rights, but also avoid complications that could come up, for example, as Tamar mentioned, by breaking the Brown Act on social media. So in our next slide, this is interesting, and Jamie may jump in because he's an expert on these things, but there are many different types of city hearings. There's a quasi-judicial type of hearing, which is when the board, the body, or the council is applying rules to a specific individual or a project. So for example, Planning Commission does this all the time, where you may be approving a specific permit for, some house renovations or a business application. Many different bodies and city council all the time also approve legislative types of items and have those types of hearings. And that is when you're making public policy decisions that really do apply to either the whole city or kind of like what Tamar was talking about earlier, the majority of residents or businesses within the city's jurisdiction. So keep that in mind because that depends how you interact about those types of items on social media. It depends on what kind of hearing we're talking about. So, and then a tip is the decision you're about to make, does it affect one person or one house, or does it affect everybody that lives in the city or all the houses in the village, right? Great. Thanks, Julia. So this is the chart that's in the actual policy. I'm not going to read it verbatim here for you, but it just kind of highlights that there's acceptable actions and then definitely things that are against the policy. And then on the second row, there's remedies or actions we can take if we realize one of those actions has taken place. So one thing I just kind of want to point out is what we're discouraging is if a board or commissioner or council member is treating a specific quasi-judicial matter, so a specific item on an agenda differently on social media than other items, because then, comments or things made on social media about that item can become either a daisy chain meeting, breaking the Brown Act, or every comment made on that social media post becomes a matter of public record and part of the record for that meeting. Okay, go ahead. And I can rephrase it, yeah.
The other thing is if you are doing something different, treating a project differently than you treat other projects as a planning commissioner. This is mostly planning commission, right? Museum board, art and cultural commission, this issue almost would never come up. The planning commissioner. So for example, if you had 10 single family home renovation projects that came to you and on one of them, you posted it on your Facebook page and said, what does everyone think about this? That person would have a very good reason to think that they're being treated differently than other people and that the law is being applied to them in a sense differently. And so it's possible that by doing that sharing, you could put yourself in a position where you couldn't actually participate in the decision making. You'd have to recuse because you no longer are perceived as unbiased. So that's kind of one of those things is it's like you don't lose your First Amendment rights just because you're on the planning commission. You can still express them, but it may mean you have to step away from your planning commission role. Because in that context, what the planning commission is doing is kind of acting as a judge, right? The planning commission is looking at the city's laws, it's adopted general plan, it's adopted zoning, and weighing whether this application is in conformance with our laws.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So these are some examples I made. These are not real posts, but this is the kind of encouraged engagement that is totally fine, sort of like what our city manager just outlined. If it's just kind of a topic of general interest, and actually I think this is a real post from a mayor somewhere in Arizona, it looks like, posting about an upcoming monsoon. You can't vote to approve a monsoon, even if you may want to. So it's fine to spread the word. You've been probably seeing a lot of social media outreach from council about just basic storm safety in the last few weeks, recovery initiatives, that kind of thing. That's fine. This is another example here on the right side of the screen that is just sharing an article of public interest about, another city's project. So that's fine too. The next slide is going to show you some things that, probably don't do that, please. It could get us in trouble. It's problematic. So an example of a council person who's going to be voting upcoming on a specific park project, posting that on social media, asking specifically for the public to comment in that forum, when really that should be done in a public meeting. That's the whole idea behind the Brown Act, right? So we keep it in a publicly agendized meeting. That's when you can receive public comments that everyone else can hear and understand. And then this other example is a mayor directly opposing a specific quasi-judicial decision that's upcoming, which really that statement should be made again in a public meeting and not on an Instagram post. And I think we're just wrapping up an overview here. Don't post content regarding quasi-judicial hearings just as a rule. That'll keep things really simple. If you just don't do that, you'll be good. Again, mostly planning commissioners to think about that. And that whole idea of violating the Brown Act, if multiple board members or council members start commenting or engaging in an online conversation, you're having a meeting, and that is not permissible under the Brown Act. So, hey, that was easier than I thought. Any questions, I'm happy to answer. Okay, awesome, thank you.
So is everyone's head spinning on what you can't do and all the ways you can get in trouble? It's not that hard. I think the thing to keep in mind at the end of the day is the Brown Act is the biggest one. That's the one that you see the most often is the people who aren't familiar with government just, sort of trying to get a consensus and talk to people about what are we going to do next week. And that's just the one that I think that takes the most adjustment is that understand that those conversations are supposed to happen at the meeting. But otherwise, other than the planning commissioners, I wouldn't worry too much about a lot of these other items. Worry about the code of conduct, treat each other well, be civil, follow the process. But the other stuff is generally doesn't come up as much for the other advisory committees. But if you ever see it, please reach out to your staff person and we'll help you out. Jerry.
Sorry, on the Freedom of Information Act, how long does that last for? I mean, how long is things retained for?
So that's actually one of the reasons why you might want to use the city email account, because the city's email account, we retain records for, I think it's 3 months, and then they're automatically purged consistent with our policy. I don't know if you have a purging policy for your own personal email account, but it probably isn't as rigorous as 3 months. So there is no statute of limitations on how far back people can come in and ask for a PRA from 10 years ago. Our answer to those is very often we don't have those records anymore, but it needs to be consistent with our records retention schedule and everything else. So that's an advantage to using a city email.
Right, and sorry, just one more question. How do you handle a text message then? I mean.
So I can answer this. If you have text messages pertaining to a project, you can take screenshots of them and then you can email those screenshots or provide them on a USB stick to me or the city attorney.
Or 90-day period.
Right.
Tamar, I don't help us out here. I don't think there's like a records retention schedule for your own personal texts, right?
So it doesn't, the location of the communication doesn't really matter. It's whether or not the communication would be considered a public record. And so, and I would also note that records that have to do with city decisions, deliberations, and I think I actually looked at the records retention policy somewhere recently, but it's 2 years. If I were a planning commissioner, I would try very hard not to send text messages about projects for this reason. And it's an annoying answer, but the Supreme Court's ruling in 2017 that privately held records can be considered public records for the purposes of the PRA did not come with very much guidance on how to actually implement that. And so basically since then, all of the city attorneys have been trying to figure out what the best way is to do that. And what I don't remember, I don't know if it was Julia or Chloe just described, is to screenshot them and then save them to a folder or send them to Julia or me or whoever's assisting with the Public Records Act response. But it is a very cumbersome procedure. I agree.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming. Have a good night and thank you for your service to Capitola.
Thank you. It's a great job.
Thank